We tend to think of the family as a purely social group, a collection of individuals who happen to share a roof. But in psychology, it operates as a rigid biological system. Like a hanging mobile, the entire structure is constantly driven to maintain systemic homeostasis, a forced, delicate balance where every part must play its assigned role to keep the whole thing from collapsing. Homeostasis is blind. It protects the existing state of the system at all costs, even when those established patterns are toxic. If the system's baseline is built on denial, then pretending everything is fine becomes the mechanism for survival. Go back 3 generations in your bloodline. A crisis hits: abuse, addiction, neglect. To maintain that fragile homeostasis, the adults choose absolute silence. The pain is packaged up and passed silently to the next in line. That silence forces the body to absorb what the mind cannot voice. Chronic stress from these unresolved crises begins to rewire the nervous system, eventually embedding these survival responses into the bloodline through epigenetic transmission. Unprocessed pain becomes a physical inheritance. The majority of the family accepts this arrangement. They learn to suppress their own reality to keep the peace. They adopt a fawn response, appeasing the volatile members, merging with the threat, and dissolving their own boundaries to stay safe within the system. But occasionally, an anomaly is born into the group, a child who is biologically incompatible with the unspoken rules. In family systems theory, they are called the black sheep, or the truth teller. This diagram illustrates what makes the truth teller different at a neurobiological level. They possess a physical intolerance for cognitive dissonance. When the family dictates one narrative, we are happy, but the actual environment is chaotic, the truth teller's amygdala treats that gap as a severe threat. While others can swallow the lie to maintain homeostasis, the black sheep's nervous system physically rejects it. This rejection of the family narrative is a mechanism designed to halt a repeating cycle. By refusing to process corrupted data, the truth teller forces the system to finally acknowledge the reality it has ignored for generations. In biology, there is a concept known as the evolutionary scout. When a herd is trapped in a dying environment, one single organism leaves the safety of the group to wander into the wilderness, searching for uncorrupted territory so the species can survive. The black sheep is the human equivalent. They step out of the dark enmeshed identity cave of the family unit, compelled to seek out a psychological environment that actually aligns with reality. Look back 2 generations again. You might see healthy independence. You see enmeshment, where personal boundaries do not exist, and triangulation, where 2 family members refuse to communicate directly, dragging a third person into the middle to carry the tension. In these homes, the adults lack emotional regulation. Instead of mirroring the child's emotions to soothe them, the adults use the children as emotional shields. The burden of managing the family's volatile moods is forced entirely onto the outcast. The family system doesn't isolate the outcast because they are defective. The system requires a scapegoat. They need a designated container to dump their own unprocessed shadow into, so they never have to look at it themselves. Because the outcast spent their formative years scanning rooms and managing adult emotions, they develop intense survival adaptations, hyper-empathy and hyper-vigilance. Out in the real world, this exact wiring makes them a lifelong magnet for emotional dumping. You see the markers in their friendships. They attract conversational narcissists, people who hijack discussions for validation, and friends who rely on them for chronic venting, treating them like an unpaid crisis hotline. This animation shows the biological toll of that dynamic. The central nervous system takes on the emotional weight of others, flooding the brain with cortisol and adrenaline. The result is compassion fatigue, a severe state of physical and emotional exhaustion. The tragedy is that the brain rationalizes this exhaustion. Because earning love meant being useful in childhood, the nervous system equates self-abandonment with survival. You begin operating under a covert contract. You give endless support, hoping for reciprocation that never comes. Over time, your own identity erodes until you are completely invisible, entirely consumed by the needs of everyone around you. Breaking out of this cycle requires a radical shift in environment. To survive a deeply toxic system, the outcast must establish physiological distance. The nervous system needs thousands of miles of safety before it can even begin to assess the damage. This is achieved through environmental sterilization. It is the absolute, quiet removal of toxic people's access to your energy. You don't make dramatic announcements. You shift routines, let calls go to voicemail, and systematically close the doors. Society often stigmatizes this as being cold or damaged, but cutting off people who drain you is a vital biological defense mechanism. It is the implementation of selective sociability to correct a massive, lifelong energy imbalance. Creating this extreme autonomy gap is the only way the amygdala can finally exit survival mode. The perceived threat is removed. The nervous system can stand down, rest, and begin to incubate. Establishing psychological safety requires prioritizing your own biological stability over the demands of people who only valued you for your compliance. Flash forward to the present day. The previous generation reaches out, attempting to hand you that same heavy parcel of shame, guilt, and obligation that has circulated for decades. This time, you refuse it. You become the absolute firewall for your bloodline. The generational transmission of trauma stops with you. But refusing the trauma externally isn't enough. You have to reprogram the corrupted operating system you were handed. Psychologists call this cognitive restructuring, a deliberate, active method used in cognitive behavioral therapy to identify and dismantle inherited maladaptive schemas. You isolate the distorted thoughts programmed into you as a child, like, "my needs are a burden." You actively replace them with objective, structural realities. "I have boundaries, and access to my energy is a privilege." This practice permanently severs the invisible strings of the family's covert contract. You stop auditioning for a role in your own life. This process involves dismantling the heavy weight of generational trauma and restructuring those experiences into a functional foundation for a new life. The ultimate biological and psychological outcome of this process is exiting the enmeshed system entirely. You arrive at what is known as the fully differentiated self. You are intact, you are autonomous. The period of isolation and the resulting pain provided the structural friction required to finally sever the invisible strings of the old system. If you were the outcast, the scapegoat, the one who never quite fit in, you were never the problem. You were the evolutionary solution your ancestors had been waiting for.